Hello and welcome to The Point. This morning, the BJP released its manifesto. It's a 42-page document that covers a range of subjects from the economy to the Ram Mandir, from minorities to labour law reform. So tonight, we shall devote the entire programme to one critical question. Is the BJP manifesto a credible roadmap for securing India's future, with, of course, a few surprising and welcome elements? Or is it disappointing and even at times vague and vacuous? Since the economy is undoubtedly the single biggest challenge facing the government, we shall first concentrate on how the BJP plans to tackle this problem and ask, does it have the right solutions? My guests are former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Virmani, the former editor of The Hindu Siddharth Varadarajan, the well-known CEO, author and columnist Gurcharan Das, the chairman of APCA Badshah Sen, and BJP spokesperson Prakash Javadekar. Let me start, Mr. Gurcharan Das, with you, and let me start by asking you for your overall impression of the BJP manifesto.
Well, you know, if you ask me, the truth is that it's a pretty boring document as a whole. It lacks the sharpness of Modi's focused attempt to raise economic growth, to create jobs, and to create skills in the economy so that the country can harvest a demographic dividend. You know, it's no wonder it's been scripted, looks like, by a committee of bureaucrats.
Okay.
And obviously the leader of this committee was a person who maybe shouldn't be in politics anymore.
Prakash Javadekar, one of the things, let me stop you there. I'll come back to you in a moment's time, Mr. Gurcharan Das. Prakash Javadekar, one of the things that stands out in the manifesto, and it's a general point, I'll come to specifics a little later, is that the manifesto talks about something called the neo-middle class. And this is defined by you as those who have risen from the category of poor and are yet to stabilize in the middle class. To my ears, that sounds like a concept you've borrowed straight from Rahul Gandhi.
No, I really don't think. If Congress wants to call copycat, then they can't criticize this, because they can't criticize their own manifesto. The issue is the country's problems remain the same, so every party will be speaking about it. The two problems and our manifesto rest on exactly on the premise of what Gurcharan Das expects. Though he may find there are many other items also, but the main thrust is on job creation through large public and private investment, including FDI.
But just a moment, Before Mr. Javadekar, I'll come to all of those, but first answer my question. How is it that you have come up with the same concept that Rahul Gandhi has been talking about, and it's not something he began talking about yesterday, he's been talking about it for at least the last 5-6 months. Certainly since his January speech at the AICC. How is it that you've come up with the same concept?
No, the issue is very clearly that the suffering class is this class. You can call it anything. The issue is those who are technically above the poverty line but suffer because of the Congress economic policies, anti-people policies, which has resulted into an unabated inflation. We want to address their concerns, and Modi has very clearly said
so does Rahul Gandhi. This is the point.
Poor will go.
This is the point I'm making, that you're doing the same thing Rahul Gandhi has been talking about. Are you not a little embarrassed? After all, he doesn't have a copyright on the concept, but usually political parties steer away from copying each other.
See, no, in our country, when the Congress has reduced the country to a very suffering class in all sections, the class which is suffering most, the poor, and just above the poverty line technically, but they are also poor, and we are talking about that poor also. Also, we are talking about many other things.
Just a moment, so I'll come to your other things in a moment's time. Let's stick to one subject at a time, and at the moment the subject we're talking about is my claim that you borrowed a concept that Rahul Gandhi first spoke about in January, and I'm simply asking whether it's embarrassing. Siddharth Varadarajan, the concept is that of the neo-middle class, and it's defined. Just a moment, Mr. Javadekar, I'll come back to you. Let me bring in someone else and I'll come back to you. The concept, Siddharth Varadarajan, is defined as those who have risen from the category of poor and are yet to stabilize in the middle class. Do you find it strange that the BJP is echoing not just the concept but the language of Rahul Gandhi, or is it something that's quite understandable because after all, he doesn't have a copyright on it?
Absolutely. I think Rahul Gandhi is echoing something that social scientists have been talking about, and it doesn't surprise me that those ideas find an echo in the BJP's manifesto. I mean, a lot of it is a rehash of ideas that were in earlier BJP manifestos or concepts that have been knocking about in political discourse for the last 2 or 3 years. So I don't think BJP needs to be ashamed or worried about the fact that something that is there in the manifesto has been talked about earlier by somebody like Rahul Gandhi. I don't think it's an embarrassment. Parties learn from each other, they borrow from each other.
Okay.
I don't think they need to be ashamed about it.
Gentlemen, let's then move away from that general point of copying to more specific details about this manifesto. And let's start, Mr. Virmani, with the economy. Speaking about economic growth, the manifesto simply says we will find out solutions which are effective in the short run and lasting in the long run. Full stop, that's all. And then speaking on fiscal discipline, it simply talks about strict implementation without in any way setting a specific fiscal deficit target, leave aside a deadline for achieving it. Are you disappointed by that level of vagueness and the absence of specifics?
So very quickly, before coming to this issue, incidentally, I wrote about the new middle class 12 months ago in the Indian Express.
So they're copying you, not even Rahul Gandhi?
No, nobody is copying.
The credit is yours. Okay.
But I didn't use, I used the word new middle class actually.
But come back
anyway,
come back
so
to these.
growth and fiscal deficit. You know, one of the points I have made in whatever I have written on what the next government should do when it comes into power is that growth and macroeconomics are very complicated things. So there's two issues which arise. One, a lot of people comment on growth and macro as if they are experts. I'm afraid it's much more complicated than that.
Can I stop you there? I'm not talking about how it should be commented on. I'm asking you a specific
question. I know,
question.
but it's relevant.
The silence here.
The next part. So the question is, there have already been statements that all you need to do is to improve governance and you'll get back to high growth. Well, you can get back to something like 5.5 to 6% by improving governance, but to take it more than that, you need to do much more.
Forgive me. I need to interrupt you because it's a specific question I want to put.
So, it is better.
Let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
I want you to comment on something very specific. All this manifesto says about growth is one sentence. We will find out solutions which are effective in the short run and lasting in the long run. Is that sufficient?
My bottom line is, it is better to not say too much than to say things which are wrong. There are all kinds of views out there and they are opposing views. To pick one of those which is wrong would be worse than not speaking about it. But I admit that, you know, that one line is a bit too cryptic, if that's your point.
Not only is it cryptic, but on fiscal discipline, all they say is they'll have strict implementation of discipline, but they don't set a fiscal deficit target and they are completely silent about when it will be achieved. Now again, is that just too vague and too meaningless to be almost trite?
Well, it is, it's not giving you any indication, if that's your point.
So are you disappointed by that?
Yes and no, as I said, because having seen manifestos from inside the government, what is written in a manifesto of a governing party becomes almost like a lakir ka fakir. So I would much rather not have something which is wrong than to have a whole lot of stuff in there.
Gurcharan, let me put that argument to you. Mr. Virmani says he'd rather have silence than details that turn out to be wrong and end up becoming what he calls a lakir ka fakir. Now, when you talk about subsidies, the manifesto is completely silent about them, absolutely. And there's nothing at all in the BJP manifesto about petrol, diesel, kerosene and LPG subsidies, and any economist will tell you that those are critical issues for the new government to grapple with. Does the silence worry you? Or do you take the Virmani line that silence is better than a mistake?
Yeah, no, I think what this manifesto lacks is focus. It's got a kitchen sink and everything else besides it. And it's a disappointment after listening to the very sharp vision that Modi has been selling to the country, and it needed, as you say about growth, it needed very specific steps that we can take. Now, they are there. If you read them, if you read from here, there, you'll pick up those things. But since growth is such a priority for our country, I would have expected much greater clarity on growth. Similarly, as you said, fiscal discipline. Similarly, I would have had a lot more ideas on skills training, which will be so important. I mean, I missed the statement on labor reforms, labor law reforms.
I'll come to labor reforms in a moment's time. But I want to just quickly sum up on the silences on fiscal deficit, the silences on growth, the complete and utter silence on subsidy. You're saying you're disappointed. Give me a yes or no.
Well, I'm disappointed.
All right.